Conor, new Conor. I think like everybody's trying to figure out like which version of Conor it is. I mean, does it remind you of any point in his career, like where he is right now, or is this just something new?
Yeah, no, it does for sure. I think that when we sat down the other day and had an interview, it did kind of remind me of, you know, a couple of years ago and how he was. He wasn't as talkative as maybe he was even back then, but I think that's different, right? There's a mission on his mind, there's a lot of pressure, and regardless of whether he acknowledges the noise or not, it's still surrounding him. So in terms of his attitude and kind of the sound bites and that kind of stuff, that was very old Conor, we'll call it, even though I don't like doing that. But I think this is kind of an evolution of taking all of those experiences through the UFC, and especially the last couple of fights combined, and this is who he believes he needs to be, and this is just who he is right now.
Yeah. And then I want to ask you about Dustin as well, right? Because the press conference was interesting, seeing them both on stage yesterday. It Dustin played it pretty cool, right? It's like, it doesn't bother me, it doesn't even get in my head at all. But he did look a little fired up when the thing started. So what can you tell us as far as like behind the scenes, behind the cameras, like this calm, cool, collected Dustin that doesn't care, is that it, or is he having to calm himself down in moments?
Honestly, I mean, from what I've seen, it really seems that that is accurate. It seems like he's telling the truth and that he is calm, cool, and collected. I think, especially having that experience at UFC 178, I don't know if it would ever get worse than that for him, you know, in terms of being fired up at an opponent, and I think he probably took a lot from that. I'm not saying that at the end of the day he doesn't go home or wherever he's staying and be frustrated by certain lines, or, oh, I should have said this. He probably does do that, but in terms of how we see him, he's genuinely, like, very even-keeled. You would maybe see the same Dustin, whether it was that opponent or a different opponent. I think he really is now in the mindset, in the groove of what he needs to do to be successful and not allow that smack talk or the outside noise or the opponent or whoever it may be fluster him as it did at 178.
Nice. Last thing for me, I want to ask you, I mean, obviously everything's about the main event, but is there a story or something that you've uncovered this week, or a personality, just something that like needs attention? Because you may get it on the broadcast, you may not. So give it to us now. What's one that people need to know about?
Well, I actually love this Max Griffin and Carlos Condit fight, because Max said that one of the first fights he saw with the WC was a Carlos Condit fight, and he said, I saw him pacing and going back and forth in front of the camera, and he was snarling, and that was a guy I didn't want to just be like. I also knew I wanted to fight him one day, and so for a long time that's been on his radar. And I think it's so cool because a guy like Carlos Condit, we all know how talented he is and all of his accomplishments, but I think there's something to be said for talents like that who have been able to be in the organization. Dustin Poirier is another great example, but be in the organization between the WC, UFC, Strikeforce even, for so long, right? So be at the top of the game and be dangerous for not just 1 or 2 years, not 5 years, but this is 10, 15 years in the sport where you are still putting the fear of God into the opponent that stands across from you. And I think that I love that part of that story, because I love that Max Griffin was this, you know, junior high or high school kid watching a WEC fight and seeing somebody like, wow, that guy looks really cool and his nickname's Natural Born Killer. And now he gets to face him, but I mean, all due respect to Carlos Condit, because that guy has been on top of the game since Max was in junior or high school, you know what I mean? So it's really, I think there's a lot to look forward to in that fight besides the actual matchup. I love the story behind that one. Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Have you met Chris Montino at all this week? I know he took this fight on short notice. His media day, he said he was working 80 hours up until January, 80 hours a week up until June. It seems that a lot of fans have gravitated towards his story. So in your interactions with him, how's he been?
Yeah, he's been great. I don't want to say he seemed overwhelmed or anything, but there is just a lot to do, right? And when it's your first time and you come to such a well-oiled machine that has, okay, here's what your schedule is, and you look at things, it could be a little daunting, and certainly because he's facing a guy like Sean O'Malley, there's going to be a little bit more attention on him than maybe somebody who took a short notice fight on the same card, but, you know, maybe a different opponent earlier in the night. He seems to be handling everything really well. I think that he understands this could be an incredible opportunity should he win, but if he doesn't, there's not a lot lost. And that's what I took away from our interactions and our conversations, was that he seemed very confident that no matter what, taking this step is a good one. So there's not really any negatives. Yes, it might not end in his favor, and maybe, you know, you have that short-term embarrassment or whatever it may be. But in the long term, you are proving you're willing. You're proving you're going to come in here and get on the scale. You're going to be under those bright lights of a pay-per-view. Everything else is going to be relatively easy, you know, compared to that. After this fight, like his second fight in the UFC, I'm sure is going to be like the easiest thing he has ever had in his life. But he just seems to be in a really great, healthy mindset of like, no, I'm coming in here to win. I believe I have the tools to win. But if I don't, okay, I'll get another fight, and then I'll be able to prepare. I'll be able to kind of start my journey in the way that I'm supposed to.
And finally, I know a lot of fans were happy to see the quote-unquote old Conor at the press conference, but I think some people thought he crossed the line a little bit by bringing in Dustin Poirier's wife into the trash talk. I'm curious, do you think that was a little over the line, especially with the tweets and saying she's DMing and all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love when family members in general are brought in because I am one, and I don't like being a part of it either. So, you know, I think that the Poirier family handled it really well. I actually laughed out loud when I saw Dustin's post, like me and hubby walking into the arena. I thought it was hilarious. No, I don't love it, and I don't think that it really adds anything. I understand why he was doing it, right? Like he's trying to probably get an edge somehow or fire Dustin up and sell the fight, which is also what he's so great at. So if that's what he thought he needed to do, then, you know, that's his decision. I could probably do without it though, especially like I said, considering the position I'm in, I wouldn't love it if it was me.
A lot of this fight, the story's been around Conor not bringing Dee and the kids over with him. You've been around it this time, and when the family is here. Do you see the difference that he's trying to make, and can you see it? Do you feel a different energy?
Yeah, you know what's funny? I mean, I wasn't on Fight Island last fight. I had COVID, but I'm here. And I will say, for the fights they've been around, though, no, I honestly don't really see that much of a difference in him because I'm seeing him in atmospheres where he's already clocked in for work. So even though it's behind the scenes of an interview or walking into a weigh-in or whatever, he's still already kind of on the clock. But he told me when we sat down, he's like, listen, you can't want to go kill a man and be giving your baby a bottle and nurturing them. For him, it just can't, it can't be the same thing. I talked to Michael Bisping yesterday, and Michael's like, no, for me it was completely opposite. For me, I can 100% do both. But if Conor feels like he can't give 100% either direction, then I respect that decision. I think, though, in terms of his attitude or however he conducts himself, whether it's D or not, he seemed pretty much the same. Even back for Maymac, I mean, Conor Jr. was a baby. I remember they had a high chair or something in his dressing room, and he kind of seemed the same guy. I just think if he can take those distractions away and maybe he realized something from the last camp, then if it benefits him, then all power to him. But he seems kind of the same guy regardless of who's around.
Megan too, right? You were open about kind of sharing your thoughts on the interaction with Stephen A. Smith a while back, and he'll be working this event. Are you going to be working with him at all?
Well, I'm not directly with him. We're on different desks, but I made a point to go talk to him the other day, and we had a really lovely conversation. I think there's just, you know, he has a lot of jobs, right? So he maybe doesn't get to see everything as closely as other people who cover the sport or who are big fans of the sport. He was so kind. He completely, took it upon himself to be like, hey, it was my bad, and made it very clear he's not a UFC expert. He's not somebody who gets to even watch a ton of content. And so he was super nice, but I wasn't going to let us work a broadcast together on Saturday without making sure I went in there and we had a great chat. So Koss was there. Everything was good.
Do you think it's important to kind of bring in those maybe bigger name analyst type figures that maybe aren't the most educated about MMA, but to help them learn and bring in their audiences to mix a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I know that there was mixed reviews when people saw who was all a part of the broadcast team, but I think, hey, anybody with a platform who's willing to do the work is important. I think that as long as they know what they know, right? They're not trying to go outside of any sort of realm of knowledge or try to claim to be experts in certain things that they're not. I think it can't hurt. I mean, they have huge platforms. People know them, and we have a lot of people who tune in for Conor McGregor fights that maybe aren't diehard UFC fans. Maybe this is one of 2 pay-per-views they buy in a year. So if they can relate, oh, I see Stephen A. Smith on there, that's cool, he's here, and they already know him, I think it only helps everyone else. I also think it's our job to try and help Max Kellerman or Stephen A. if they have questions, if there are things that they're not understanding, if this is, a new endeavor for them in certain regards, that we as the broadcasters who always do this, every pay-per-view, that we're also helping. It was why it was important for me to talk to Stephen before we got to the arena on Saturday. I want to make sure that every person on this team is prepared, they're ready to shine, they have what they need, because at the end of the day, there's benefits from every person being on there, and we can all kind of elevate each other, and I think they'll do great.
Team effort, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I just wanted to get your thoughts on the co-main event, because I wouldn't say it's flying under the radar, but as most co-mains to a Conor McGregor fight, Will. But
Sure.
just thoughts overall on Wonder Boy versus Gilbert.
I absolutely love it. I love that we're kind of like nostalgic with this match of karate versus jiu-jitsu, even though obviously they're incredibly well-rounded mixed martial artists. I just think it's a really fun matchup. You'd be hard-pressed to find two nicer guys in the sport, which is always hard for me. I'm like, man, you're so happy for whoever wins and so sad for whoever loses. And I'll be doing, those interviews regardless, hand raised or not. But it's a great fight, and I'm excited for them to kind of steal the show. And I don't mean that. I don't think the main event's not going to be great, but I think you're right. It's flying under the radar, but I think once they get into the octagon, their performance is going to be something that people walk away from the event making sure they mention. I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, a lot on the line there, especially for Stephen Thompson, but there is a lot on the line for Gilbert. If he wants to climb back up that mountain towards a title shot, he needs to start with a win here, and I think he knows that as well. So I'm really, really intrigued by that one, both stylistically and because of the storyline.
Thanks, Megan.
Yeah.
Megan right here. Obviously tomorrow night is going to be a very big night, more people watching than usual. When you think about your day at work tomorrow, what do you visualize? Like, are there certain hits that you just hope really make it on the broadcast? Are there certain things? Talk to me.
All of them. I'm a very annoying person with our producers because I'm trying to tell everybody's story, especially on a card like this, because every athlete on this entire card, UFC 264, from the first fight to the last fight, deserve to have their story told. And when our guys at the Octagon are calling the fights, they have to call what they're seeing, right? They can try and make sure they're including some sort of factoid or story about them. But for me, that's where I absolutely live. That's where I want to make sure, there's more eyes on this? That means we can sell this many fighters now. So I'm always like, hey, I have something on this guy, I have something on this guy. But with a show like this, it is a monster in terms of production. There are so many elements. It will be inevitable things get killed. We're going to run over on certain things, I'm sure, but I am always, you guys can guarantee, campaigning to be like, how about this story? How about this story? Because I think it's even more important when you have extra eyeballs on a card.
What do you remember the most about the first time you ever interviewed Conor McGregor?
That's a good question. The first time I ever interviewed him, I remember hearing the hype, and I was thinking like, okay, is this real? I think that we had kind of maybe been through that before, and all right, we'll see how this pans out. And I remember interviewing him. I think maybe the one that stands out to me was in Boston for the first FS1 card. He was like a soundbite machine. The guy, it was like he had already gone to broadcasting school or something. He knew exactly how to speak. He knew who to address. He knew how to answer questions. He had been asked repetitive things, and sometimes that is difficult for someone who's relatively new in the sport to be like, I have to have the same energy and the same answer and make sure, even though I've been asked this 10 times today, I'm still doing it. He was already a total pro. And I just remember thinking like, wow, okay, if he can fight as good as, he can do these interviews, then the hype is certainly real. And he's just always been a guy that seems natural in front of a camera.
People talk about, like, when you talk to somebody, like, did you know then, like, they would go on to be a big deal? Did you have that moment, like, hey, this guy's going to be a big deal? And have you ever felt that way about somebody else since then that you've interviewed?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I would have to think about it with have I felt that way about somebody else. I mean, I actually feel like maybe Sean O'Malley comes to mind with that. But let me think about it with the other person. But did I know that? You kind of got the vibe, especially when you saw him perform, and when those two things mix. I mean, that is a superstar, right? That's what the Octagon needs, somebody who can drop a person in a minute, but also then cut a promo. And I remember thinking like, okay, this is probably worth the hype. I think this is going to go somewhere. Did I think it was going to be McGregor Mania the way we've seen? No, I did not. I could have never anticipated that. But I think you kind of get a clue when you interview enough athletes to know like, okay, this guy's they're gonna do something.
Thank you. Have a good show tomorrow.
Thanks.
Megan, way back here. Way back.
Oh, hi.
Hello. The presence of women in combat sports, not just as fighters, but just in the industry, is still a bit of a steep climb. But UFC seems to stand out in terms of promotions. Certainly, you're there, Karen Bryan, you see Angie on the desk, and Laura. How much do you recognize that, and what are the opportunities still that you see that you'd like women to be taking advantage of when it comes to combat sports?
Yeah, all of them. I mean, in terms of opportunities, I think that, there are limited ones sometimes when people look at our gender, but it doesn't mean we're unable to do them. It just means we haven't been given the chance yet. But I think all of us are fighting for certain things that we really want to do, whether it's commentary, whether it's more storytelling, hosting the desk, having certain things in the show that maybe aren't quite there yet, or we only do once in a while, but are important to us. I mean, I think we do a great job, and my goal is when people see me tell a story, they don't think about me as a female telling the story, they just think the best person for the job is telling the story. And I think the same thing about, you know, everybody that we work with on this broadcast. I think we all have the roles we have because we're the best for them. And it's great that we as women, you know, like you mentioned Karen on the desk, Karen is the staple of pre and post shows. You know, especially on these ESPN Plus cards, she carries that ship. There's no teleprompter. There's nothing there to assist her except her knowledge, and obviously an incredible production team behind her. But for all of us, I think we're just trying to be the very best that we are with the opportunities we get. The UFC producers are really great about making sure, you know, there are places and rooms for us to grow into, and we're always trying to do that. And so I would say, you know, I just only want all of our roles to grow because I know we're good enough to be able to have it grow. But I think right now it's very cool when you look at our sport. It's not like, oh, they have those jobs because they have to, you know, fill a certain quota of there's this many females involved. It's no, we really do the best job, and I don't think that anyone looks at any of us and they're like, oh, well, it should be this person there. They look at us and say like, oh no, that's the right person, and we just happen to be women. So good. Thanks, guys.